IAS Academy.
Hello all, welcome to IAS Academy and welcome to the program Editorial Daily, where we discuss the editorial analysis, which enhances your answer writing and enriches your perspectives. So let's get started with our today's session. So yes, let's start our session. In our today's session, the first article is the rules that failed 15 lives in Lucknow. As we already know about this Lucknow incident, everyone might be knowing about this. So we will discuss today this tragic incident, the tragic incident which has highlights a major issue in India's urban governance and the disaster management. Okay, so this article says that the rules that failed the 15 lives in Lucknow examines the devastating fire in a commercial building at Aljing, at where the place called Aliganj. Aliganj is a place in Lucknow where on June 22nd, 2026, which claimed the 15 lives of them students attending a digital animation institute. Okay, so the tragedy was not merely an accident, it was the result of the systemic regulatory failures, negligence, and weak enforcement of the safety norms. Okay, so let's see what has happened and what. Okay, so a fire has broke out onto a middle mixed use commercial building in Aliganj in Lucknow. Okay, so basically the building has housed a digital animation. This building, see this building where you can see it has an animated training institute. It had shops, it had offices and a gaming zone in it. Okay, and few other commercial establishment in it. It is a collective thing. It is a commercial building basically. Okay, so the thick smoke has rapidly engulfed the building completely, and the most victims died due to the smoke inhalation rather than burns. Rather than burns, most of them have been lost their lives due to smoke inhalation. So, rescue operations were hampered because occupants have no safe evacuation route. Okay, mainly the buildings have to have a main evacuation, the fire exit ways and all clearly. Okay, or else this type of tragedies may happen. Okay, so why did this fire become so deadly means, see it violated, the violations of mainly the fire safety norms like fire alarms and smoke detectors were either absent or non-functional. This might be the one cause, or no effective sprinkler systems. If when any fire or anything comes there, the sprinklers will spring the water, right? So that systems might be absent in the building, and emergency exits are inadequate, not larger, more exits are there. So fire extinguishers were insufficient or the poorly maintained. Okay, so fire safety equipment is very much essential only if it is regularly inspected and functional. Okay, so this is what the case is and what happened we have seen, and we'll see it clearly in the coming time. Okay, yes, let's start. The topic is the Lucknow fire tragedy, a symptom of regulatory failures and unplanned urbanization. So the syllabus which we can link this topic to this article to which topics of your GS paper is. In GS paper 2 you can link to the governance topic like governance, government policies and interventions, regulatory bodies and accountabilities. Okay, and for GS paper 3 also you can link like disaster management and infrastructure, where disaster management, urban fires, infrastructure, and urban planning topics can be related. Okay, now let us see the context of the topic. The context of this topic goes like a devastating fire in a multi story commercial building in Aliganj, Lucknow has claimed 15 lives. So, mostly students and the staff of an animated center has been killed. Okay, so the tragedy highlights the systemic regulatory gaps, severe and compliance with the building bylaws, and a lack of basic fire safety infrastructure which amidst the urban growth. Okay, this is the context of the article. Now, coming to the introduction, how can you write this topic is, see, the urban fires in India has increasingly transitioned from unpredictable accidents to predictable disasters of administrative and civic negligence. So the recent fire incident in Lucknow, that is in Uttar Pradesh, which resulted in the loss of 15 young lives, serves as a grim reminder of the systemic gaps plowing India's urban governance. So, the tragedy undercovers a deadly cocktail of flooded building bylaws. So, non-functional safety equipment and delayed regulatory enforcements, which is shielding the light on the darker side of the rapid unregulated urbanization in India's most population states. This is how you can write the introduction. Okay. When you look into the anatomy of the failure, the key issues which are highlighted to this failure is, to this tragedy is, first is the lack of structural redundancy, in the sense the commercial building lacked the basic emergency exit and a smoke ventilation system. So the only available staircase was completely obstructed by the thick smoke which is trapping the occupants inside. Okay. Next, the second failure which we can see is illegal commercial conversion. That is, the building was approved by the Lucknow Development Authority strictly for residential use under a 2014 self certification scheme. This building is only for residential thing. They did not give permission for the commercial building. Okay. So however, it was illegally operated as a commercial hub housing a pet shop, a clinic. What are in the commercial building, in that multi-store building, is a pet shop, a clinic, a video gaming zone, and an animation institute is being running in that multi-store building. Okay. So this is the one of the cause. And the third one is failure of digital modern infrastructure. Like, the digital locks on the animation center became non-functional due to power shortage during the fire and trapping the students and staff inside the college itself. Okay. So this is one of the thing we have to think about it. See, as we are going digital at the times, this also is becoming a threat for us, right? You have to think of it. Then the next is institutional and administrative lapses. Like, an injury by the LDA revived a long history of regulatory lapses. So in impacting 18 officials and engineers of the authority, which has many of whom have already retired, so showing a systemic lack of routine proactive inspections. Okay, these are the main causes which can be highlighted in this case. Okay, so let us see the regulatory gaps in the urban India. The first one is the loophole of self-certification. Okay, so while it is intended to ease the ease of doing business, the self-certification schemes and are frequently exploited by the builders who falsely complains data without fear of physical verification by local bodies. Okay, so this is one of the cause. The second one is post-disaster reactive governance. Post-disaster reactive governance is, which is enforcement actions, like each has a ceiling 71 establishments, issuing notices to 83 building owners, and ordering statewide coaching center in, I mean inspections. Okay, so were launched after the tragedy occurred. When these are all launched after the tragedy has occurred and highlighted a reactive rather than preventive approach to disaster management. Okay, and the third one is infrastructure deficit in old structural designs. Okay, so older multi-story buildings which are constructed decades ago lack the architectural provisions. Okay, so they are required for modern fire safety uh, retrofying. Okay, these buildings have to be retrofitted with the modern fire safety technologies. Okay, so the main core insight from this which we can take is, the Lucknow fire tragedy is not an isolated event but a symptom of systemic regulatory failure. So unchecked building violations and unplanned urbanization and preventive governance and strict accountability are the only way to safeguard the human lives in India's growing cities. Okay, now We'll see the way forward of the article. What we can take from this article is, first is the retrofitting the older buildings, like how to implement the adequate safety upgrades in the older structures, to use the wireless fire alarm systems to avoid the extensive rewiring, and apply the free fire existing coatings, fire resistant coatings on the structural elements, and retrofit the fire doors with self closing mechanism. This is what we have to do for the older buildings. Okay, the next is strict enforcement of legislation, like how we have to ensure the upcoming compliances with the National Building Code of India and state specific laws like the Uttar Pradesh Fire and Emergency Service Act. Okay, so and we can go through like zero tolerance for illegal commercial conversions and building violations, and also impose heavy penalties and prosecution for willful non compliance. Okay, and yes, the next one is the technology integration. In sense, the replace obsolete signs with photoilluminescent photoilluminescent markdown signs and LED emergency exits. Okay, and ensure the fail-safe overrides on all digital locking systems during the power outages and emergencies, and to deploy smart monitoring systems, lot sensors, and early warning systems for the real-time alerts. This is what we can do through technological integration. And the last one is accountability and periodic audits. Like, see, transition from one-time approval to mandatory periodic third-party fire safety audits have to be done, and create a digital database of all commercial and educational buildings with public access to fire the compliance status. Okay, and we have to fix the criminal liability on officials for dereliction of duty and regulatory lapse. Okay, this is what we can do. Okay, now moving forward, let's see the conclusion of the topic. How we can take up this is, the Lucknow fire tragedy is a loud warning that infrastructure growth cannot be divorced from human safety. So true urban development is measured not by height of its multi-story complexes, but by the robustness of its safety protocols moving forward. The safety protocols. Okay, moving forward, so India's administrative machinery must transition from a culture of post disaster firefighting to an ecosystem of proactive preventive compliance. Okay, so only through stringent accountability, structural retrofitting, and zero tolerance for building violations can India protect its human capital and ensure the safe, sustainable cities. Okay. Yes, and let us see few terminologies from this article which we can take for our answer writing. The first one is self-certification loophole, which is a governance gap where builders misrepresent the structural facts on paper and exploiting the relaxed government verification process. This is what you call self-certification loophole. The next is reactive governance. Reactive governance is an administrative approach which is categorized by taking punitive or corrective actions by only a disaster or crisis had occurred. Okay, rather than implementing the preventive measures. The next is retrofit safety protocols means which is reconstructing or adding modern safety components like fire doors, wireless alarms to the older existing buildings without altering the core architectural preservations. Okay, next is the structural redundancy. Redundancy is nothing but the inclusion of the second safety machine, like example you can say the dual staircase to the building, or creating an external emergency exist, like all. Okay, so that ensures the safety if the primary system is failed, this secondary redundancies can be used. Okay, next is the urban vulnerability in a sense, how we can say is, it is the susceptibility of urban population to population to disasters due to poor planning, high density, and lack of adherence of safety codes. Okay, yes, And what is the quote we can remember from this is, safety is not an expense. Safety is not an expense. It is an investment in human life. This is what we have to know. Okay. Yes. Moving on. Moving on to the next article. And yes, the next article for today is the cracks beneath the peddled story of an India's growth. Peddled story of an India's growth. So, we will today discuss an important editorial which is titled The Cracks Beneath the Peddled Story of an India's Growth. So, this article questions whether India's impressive GDP growth story, the impressive India's impressive GDP growth story reflects the real condition of the economy or whether the deeper structural weaknesses are being ignored. This is what the article is questioning. Okay, so let's see. India is oftenly projected as the world's fastest growing major economy. World's fastest growing major economy is India. So, an emerging manufacturing hub and a future gold power. So, while these achievements are significant, the author of this article, which is D. Raju, has argued that beneath the optimistic narrative lies several economic vulnerabilities which that could threaten the long term growth if left unaddressed. Okay, this is what the author of this article, Mr. D. Raju, has been stating. Okay, now the first concern of India's heavy dependency on imported crude oil and the natural gas is the major concern. Like where the India imports nearly 90 percentage of the its crude oil and almost half of its natural gas, which is natural gas requirement it has. Okay, so any rise in international oil prices, which widens the trade deficit and increases the inflation and weakens the rupee and raises the production cost. This is what happens whenever the oil prices increases worldwide. Obviously we will be affecting because most of the crude oil we are being importing. Okay, so despite the progresses in renewable energy, India remains vulnerable to the global energy stocks. Okay, so security is very much essential for our economic security. Okay, so let's see this article in a clear detailed manner and let's see into which papers of it we can link this topic to. Okay, now let's see. And yes, the topic is the structural cracks in India's economic growth, narrative vulnerabilities, safety nets, and the way forward. Okay, so what is the subject relevance we can see is we can link this article to GS paper 3, which is the Indian economy, where Indian economy and issues relating to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment, including the inclusive growth and issues arising from it. And we can link infrastructure, basically the energy, science and technology, and AI semiconductors also we can link this article to. And in GS paper 2 we can link this article to the governance topic, which is the government policies and interventions for development in various sectors, welfare schemes for vulnerable sessions like MGNE, RGA, Manrega. Okay, yes. Moving forward, let's see the context of this topic. How the context of this topic goes. Okay. See, this editorial authored by Mr. D. Raju, who is the General Secretary of CPI, he provides a critical evaluation of India's current macroeconomic trajectory. Okay. So it argues that beneath the high projected narrative of India being the world's fastest growing major economy, and what you called bargaining with Vikshit Bharat, there lie severe structural vulnerabilities which are ranging from import dependency and weakening social safety nets to an unfulfilled manufacturing revolution and lack of core technological sovereignty. This is what the author of the article is telling about. Okay, now we'll see the introduction, how to give up the introduction for this topic. Like, while official narratives highlights the India's macroeconomic reliance, global positioning, and Vishwaguru and long-term targets for 2047, the domestic economy faces a profound structural headwinds. Okay, so a sustainable economic model requires the moving past carefully crafted growth stories to directly comfort the systemic issues. So the true strength of an economy relies not just on GDP growth or market capitalization, but on its immunity to external shocks, the external shocks. So the strengths of its social safety nets and its capability to foster the genuine technological innovations and inclusive employment. This is how you can write the introduction for this topic. Okay, now let us see what are these macroeconomic vulnerabilities and external shocks we are getting from this article. Okay, the first is imported energy dependency. Obviously, we are depending on energy dependency, right? So, India imports nearly 90% of the crude oil and nearly 50% of its natural gas requirements. So, fluctuations in any global energy prices, which directly translate into domestic inflation in our country, expanding the trade deficits. Okay, and and pressure of the Indian rupee also uh, will be increasing, which has seen significant depreciation touching historic loss near rupees 95 against the US dollar. Okay, the next one is depletion of forex reserves. Depletion of forex reserves, like to defend the domestic currency, against this rapid depreciation, the RBI has had to intervene heavily in the foreign exchange market, selling over $53 billion. Okay, and this has caused forex reserves to slide from $720 billion to approximately $681 billion. Okay, the next one is agriculture and fertilizer risk. It is India's domestic urea production is intrinsically tied to imposed liquefied natural gas, that is LNG. Okay, so the critical fertilizer inputs like potash are heavily imported, which is global supply chain disruptions directly threatens the domestic food security and input affordability of a farmer. Input affordability for the farmer. These are the few macroeconomic vulnerabilities which we can see in our country. Next is weakening of the rural safety nets and social protection. Okay, weakening of rural safety nets and social protection, where we can see the first one is the institutional shifts, like the dismantling of the traditional planning mechanisms like the planning commission has halted for long term developmental targeting. Okay, next is the dilution of welfare schemes. See, the critical rural safety nets, particularly the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, has faced a systemic weakening. Now this Manrega has been converted to another scheme, right? So this has exposed millions of rural handouts to highlighted economic uncertainty and diminished livelihood security by compared to the previous decade. Okay, so the thing is, India's growth story cannot be judged merely by headline numbers, but the sustainable and inclusive development demands the comforting structural vulnerabilities and building a resilient, self-reliant economy which is anchored in social justice, technological sovereignty, and employment for all. Okay, next. Coming to the vulnerability in the external flow remittances and FPLs if FPLs is, see, the first one is shifting the remittance dynamics. Shifting the remittance dynamics, like, see, India recorded $135 billion in remittances in the financial year 2024 to 25, which acts as a crucial cushion of, the crucial cushion for the current account deficit. Okay, so however, the score has shifted from the working class migrants in West Asia to highly skilled professionals in Western nations, that is US and UK. Okay, so this exposes the India's remittance stability to shifting geopolitical realities, such a rising anti-immigration sentiment and the automation of professional services via artificial intelligence, via AI. Okay, next, capital flight, like, see, the foreign portfolio investors have pulled over 2.2 lakh crores from the Indian equities in recent cycles. So, this indicates the growing global caution regarding the sustainability of India's valuation premium. Okay. The next is the tech deficit and scant industrial transformation. SANT, SCANT, industrial, SANT, industrial uh, transformation. Okay. In that, the first one is digital intermediation versus technological sovereignty. Okay. See, while India has a vibrant startup ecosystem, India obviously has a vibrant startup ecosystem. It remains largely concentrated in the digital intermediation. Example: food delivery, ride hauling, and hailing, quick commerce, which are powered by the cheap, low cost labor. Okay, so it lacks the ownership of core technologies, and unlike the Taiwan, the TSMC, the South Korea's Samsung, or the US or China's AI and foundry dominance, India remains heavily reliant on imported semiconductors and capital equipment. Okay. Unlike comparing to the other countries, we are still reliant on the imported semiconductors and the capital equipment. Okay. So the next thing is the unrealized manufacturing evolution. Means, see, the promised expansion in manufacturing has not materialized sufficiently to absorb the country's demographic dividend. Okay, so as a result, millions of youth faces the precarious employment, significant wages, and shrinkaging in the opportunities, leading to jobless growth. Yes. When you come up with the conclusion, you can say that electoral success or the high stock market valuation should not be conflated with foundational economic health. So, for India to chart a resilient and self-resilient path, public policy must pivot away from the device rhetoric and corporate-centric enrichment towards the structural corrections. Okay, so the true economic sovereignty, which demands a synchronized push, receiving the public investments reinforcing the social security frameworks like Manrega, actively building core capabilities in frontier schemes, sciences like AI, robotics, and semiconductors, and the centering the economic policy around the employment generation and poverty elevation also has to be done. Okay. Yes. When you look into the key terminologies for UPSC mains examination answer, we can take up few we can take up a few terminologies from this article. The first one of it is the structural weakness. Structural weakness. Okay. See, what is the structural weaknesses? It is the deep-seated systemic flaws in an economy that cannot be fixed by short-term fiscal or monetary policy alone. This is what the structural weakness is. Next is the imported energy vulnerability. Imported energy vulnerability, which is exposure of the domestic economy to inflation and supply disruptions due to heavy reliance on foreign fossil fuels. Okay. The next is the technological sovereignty, like nation's capability to develop, control, and sustain its own critical technologies like semiconductors and AI without the strategic dependence on the foreign nations. This is what you can tell the technological sovereignty is. And then the digital intermediation, which is a business model which is focused on organizing the services and labor via the digital platforms like gig economy platforms rather than creating the tangible technological innovations. Okay. The next is the demographic dividend, which is unutilized. Like, see, the economic growth potential resulting from a shifts in a population age structure, which turns into a liability if adequate employment is not generated. This is what you call the demographic dividend, which is still not it is not utilized. Okay. The next is precarious employment. What is this precarious employment? It is the underemployment or informal employment categorized by a lack of job security, low wages, and absence of social safety benefits. Okay. The next is socialized burden versus the privatized benefits. What is this? Is it is an economic critic which describes a scenario where the risk or losses are borne by the public or state, while the profits and wealth concentrate in private and corporate hands. Okay, this is what you can say, the socialized burden versus privatized benefits. The last one you can take up the key terminology from this article is left of center economics, which means an economic philosophy which is prioritizing the state-led public investment, robust welfare safety nets, social protection, and equitable wealth distributions. Okay, so the quote to remember from this article is: an economy is not strong by the size of its market but by the security of its people. Okay, this is what we can take up from this article. Okay, yes. And yes, these are the two articles for today. We have seen the Lucknow tragedy incident and the GDP, the real GDP of India, whether it is true or anything behind it is happening. So, yes, I hope you like this video. If you want a detailed note of this editorial, do visit our website and download it from there. The link is provided in the description below. And do like, share, and subscribe our YouTube channel for your upcoming editorial analysis. And however, follow our Instagram ID and Telegram channel for your UPSC preparation. Okay, so yes, see you all tomorrow with another editorial analysis. Thank you.